For days, the suffocating tension surrounding the chaotic situation with Isaiah has been building up like a pressure cooker waiting to explode. Portia and Curtis are no longer just disagreeing, they are fundamentally at war with each other's core values. Portia firmly believes that Curtis has grossly mishandled the entire dangerous ordeal with Isaiah. In her highly trained medical and logical mind, his reckless, impulsive decisions have not only endangered innocent lives, but have also invited severe, potentially life-ruining legal liabilities to their doorstep. She looks at her husband and sees a man who refuses to listen, a man who acts first and thinks about the devastating consequences later. On the other side of this bitter divide, Curtis remains as stubborn and fiercely defensive as always. He stands his ground with an iron will, insisting that he did exactly what was necessary in the heat of the moment to protect the people he loves. But if you ask me, guys, this explosive conflict is not just about Isaiah anymore. This current crisis is merely the match that lights the powder keg. What we are truly witnessing is years of a vicious cycle of mistrust, hidden secrets, and chronic miscommunication finally boiling over into pure, unadulterated resentment. They are two desperate people speaking completely different languages, trapped in a marriage that is rapidly running out of oxygen. The tragic collision course finally reaches its absolute peak when Portia and Curtis unexpectedly cross paths on a seemingly ordinary pedestrian bridge. This is not a quiet, private room where they can calmly hash out their differences. This is a public, exposed space, and the raw emotion immediately takes over. The argument escalates with terrifying speed. The screaming matches echo over the cold concrete, and the emotional toll quickly transforms into a dangerous physical weapon. Portia, already pushed far past her psychological breaking point, is suddenly overwhelmed by a wave of biological terror. The relentless, screaming stress of the confrontation induces a massive shock to her system. Right there, in the middle of a bitter screaming match, the unthinkable happens. Portia collapses in agony as premature labor forcefully takes hold of her body. Imagine the sheer, paralyzing terror of that exact moment, ladies. 1 second, Curtis is yelling, defending his pride in his actions, and the next second, he is watching his pregnant wife drop to her knees, clutching her stomach is agonizing. Unnatural contractions rip through her body. They are completely stranded. The frantic call to emergency services is made, but fate has orchestrated a cruel and manipulative scheme. The ambulance is severely delayed, trapped in the unforgiving chaos of city traffic. Portia is screaming in pain, her medical knowledge torturing her as she realizes exactly how dangerous this premature labor is, while Curtis is rendered entirely helpless, his tough exterior crumbling into sheer, unfiltered panic. And then, in a twist of agonizing irony, who happens to stumble upon this absolute nightmare? Marshall. The patriarch, the man who has tried so desperately to mend his own fractured past and rebuild trust with his son, is suddenly thrust into a life-or-death scenario of epic proportions. He sees Portia writhing on the ground and Curtis paralyzed by fear. Marshall has absolutely no medical training, no sterile equipment, and no experience in obstetrics. All he has is a frantic 911 operator screaming desperate instructions through the tiny, distorted speaker of a cell phone. With no other viable options, and the baby crowning, Marshall is forced to step in and attempt to deliver his own grandchild on a cold, dirty, unforgiving pedestrian bridge. We are forced to watch a horrifying, traumatic sequence play out as Marshall desperately tries to follow the dispatcher's orders. He is trying to be the hero, trying to save his family, but the situation is rapidly spiraling completely out of control. It is a messy, chaotic, and deeply traumatizing emergency birth. The sheer panic in the air is suffocating. Despite Marshall's frantic, desperate efforts, things go horribly wrong. When the wailing sirens finally pierce the air and the emergency medical team arrives on the scene, the initial relief is instantly shattered by a deafening, terrifying silence. The baby's not crying. The paramedics rush in, pushing Curtis and Marshall aside, and immediately begin aggressive resuscitation efforts. The tiny, fragile infant is scooped up and rushed away in the ambulance, leaving a trail of blood and shattered hopes on the bridge. The grim reality quickly sets in. The baby has been severely deprived of precious oxygen during the chaotic, unguided delivery process. The doctors at the hospital will fight tooth and nail, utilizing every piece of modern technology they have. But ladies, I have to be honest with you, the writing is on the wall. The dark theory I am exploring today is that this beautiful, innocent child might not survive the night. And even if, by some miraculous intervention, the baby does pull through, the prolonged lack of oxygen guarantees that the neurological damage will be catastrophic and permanent. This medical tragedy is the massive, heavy domino that will crash down and obliterate everything in its path. When the devastating news is finally delivered to Portia in her sterile hospital bed, her reaction will not just be profound sadness, it will be a radioactive, all-consuming, monstrous rage. A mother's grief of this magnitude cannot be contained. It demands an outlet, a target, a villain to absorb the unbearable pain. Portia will not blame the universe, and she certainly will not blame herself. She will look right at the two men who were supposed to protect her, and she will unleash a fury that will burn their family to the ground. Portia will point a trembling, accusatory finger directly at Curtis. She will look her husband dead in the eye and essentially accuse him of murdering their child with his relentless, selfish, aggressive arguing. In her traumatized mind, the logic is flawless. If he had not pushed her to the absolute limit, if he had not engaged in that vicious cycle of stubborn pride over the Isaiah situation, her stress levels would never have spiked, and she never would have collapsed on that bridge. She will firmly believe that Curtis prioritizes ego and his need to be right over the safety of his pregnant wife and their unborn baby. But her devastating wrath will absolutely not stop with her husband. I strongly believe that Portia is going to direct a horrifying, unforgiving amount of venom straight at Marshall. She will accuse the older man of gross incompetence, screaming that he failed to save her baby when it mattered the most. She is a highly trained doctor. She knows the exact medical protocols that should have been followed, and in her blinding grief, she will hold Marshall to an impossible standard. It is completely irrational and deeply unfair. Everyone knows Marshall did everything humanly possible in a terrifying, unavoidable situation, but grief makes absolute monsters out of grieving mothers. She will convince herself that if Marshall had just been faster, smarter, or more capable, her baby would be breathing. Now, let us push this domino effect even further into the dark, complicated legal realm. What happens when Portia's uncontrollable grief drives her to seek formal, punitive justice against her own family? We could very well be looking at the formation of an unholy alliance between a devastated, vengeful Portia and a ruthless, ambitious prosecutor looking to make headlines. Could Curtis actually face civil or even criminal charges? Think about it, guys. Could a creative lawyer argue that Curtis's aggressive behavior on the bridge constituted reckless endangerment or intentional infliction of severe emotional distress that directly resulted in a wrongful death? And what about poor Marshall? Despite his undeniable Good Samaritan intentions, could he be dragged into a nightmare investigation? The authorities might scrutinize his actions, questioning if he crossed the line into practicing medicine without a license or if his panicked interventions constituted gross negligence that ultimately caused the fatality. The legal system is cold and unforgiving, and if Portia pushes for an investigation, the police will have no choice but to tear this family's worst day apart piece by piece. Furthermore, we cannot ignore the hospital board and their notorious reputation for self-preservation. The hospital administrators always harbor a hidden agenda to protect their own massive liabilities and public image. Portia is one of their most esteemed, high-profile doctors. If she is threatening a massive lawsuit or demanding justice, the hospital might actively throw Marshall and Curtis to the wolves. They could launch their own internal investigations, aggressively siding with Portia to shield the institution from any collateral damage. They will happily fuel the fire of Portia's blame if it means keeping the hospital's name out of the mud. This is how a legacy family is completely and utterly destroyed. It does not happen overnight. It happens through a series of tragic, unavoidable dominoes falling one by one. The loss of the baby will completely sever the already fragile bond between Portia and Curtis. There is no therapy in the world that can fix a marriage where the wife genuinely believes the husband killed their child through his sheer stubbornness. Curtis will be drowning in a toxic ocean of guilt and defensiveness, unable to comfort the woman he loves because she recoils at his very touch. Meanwhile, Marshall, who has already battled so many intense personal demons and mental health struggles, might completely break under the crushing weight of Portia's accusations. To be blamed for the death of your own grandchild is a burden no human soul can carry. You might spiral into a dark, inescapable depression, believing that his mere presence brings nothing but death and ruin to his family. The entire family structure will collapse into a toxic wasteland of blame, legal depositions, and shattered hearts. Even if, by some miracle, the official medical examiner determines that the baby's tragic fate was due to an unforeseeable, underlying medical complication that had absolutely nothing to do with the argument or the bridge delivery, the emotional damage has already been done. The cruel words spoken in the heat of grief cannot be unsaid. The accusations cannot be taken back. The vicious cycle of blame will have already poisoned the well permanently. So, I leave you with this chilling question to ponder as we brace for the upcoming episodes. When the dust finally settles on that bloody pedestrian bridge, and the legal vultures begin to circle the grieving parents. Will Portia's desperate need for a scapegoat ultimately send her own husband to a prison cell, or will the crushing weight of this unbearable tragedy drive Curtis to walk away from his family forever?